The Paddy Power Half Hour on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power, the greatest football partnership since Duff and Heskey.
Well, it's noon on a Friday. It means it is time for the Paddy Power Half Hour here on offtheball.com's social channels. For the next half hour or so, Enda Coll, Phil Egan and I will be taking a look at the fallout from the UEFA meeting that took place this week. It means that the Republic of Ireland's qualifier away to Slovakia in the semi-finals of Euro 2020 qualifying now won't be happening until September. It means Mick McCarthy's contract will likely have to be extended. And also the women's team. They were due to play Ukraine in a Euro 2021 qualifier. That game will also now be pushed back, as UEFA have cancelled all international games that were due to take place in June. Plenty of doubt over what's going to happen with the rest of the seasons across Europe as well. Indefinite suspension on both the Champions League and Europa League, and we're still no clearer to finding out when the domestic leagues might return across Europe as well. As I mentioned, both Phil Egan and Enda Coll are here with me to take a look at all the topics across the next half hour or so. Gentlemen, good afternoon to you.
Well, how are you doing?
And of course, we remember that all of our football coverage here on Off the Ball is with thanks to Paddy Power. For information on responsible gambling, check out dunlewy.net. Phil, I'll start with yourself. A pretty important meeting. It seems every week there's an important meeting of UEFA at this stage. But this week, we kind of got a little bit more clarity about what's happening with the rest of the football season. And that clarity is to say that it's unlikely we're probably going to see football before June.
Yeah, I mean, that would have been the feeling even last week. Just the way the coronavirus is spread across Europe, it's hard to imagine football actually taking place. But when it does actually resume, I think we'll all be glad to have it back. But, you know, there is a line and, you know, you have to have empathy towards what's going on at the moment. So, you know, UEFA can plan all they want, but, you know, those plans have to come with a bit of an asterisk.
And probably no great surprise that this announcement was made, particularly the games being cancelled in June. I think Niall Quinn was very open when he said the original postponement was pushing things back into June. He thought first week of June, second week of June was very optimistic for those qualifiers to take place.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like every business across the world is not really just focused on football, that you can't plan beyond June. So I think really what they're doing is they're giving that June date, and they're just the closer we get to it, the more clarity we get, and everyone becomes aware that this is just not going to happen. It's not going to be possible, and that's right across the board. That doesn't just revolve around football. I think businesses are taking it like that as well. They're just planning this quarter as much as they possibly can, and then hoping that maybe when that June date finally comes, then we might be within 2 or 3 months of actually getting back to some sort of normality. But I do want to emphasize what Phil says, especially in the realms of football, when we're talking about a football match taking place or the Premier League returning or anything like this, you have to be really empathetic with what's going on and what the real world implications are that don't relate to football. There are people dying all across the world, especially in the likes of Italy. The death rate is growing in the UK, and you have to take that into consideration when you're talking about something as trivial as football. I know we have been have been missing football, but at the end of the day, there is bigger things going on in the world, and that needs to be taken into account as well.
I want to get both your opinions on something that Nathan Murphy tweeted last night, and I'll come to you first on it. He reckons that because the qualifiers are likely now to run into September at the very least, and possibly even October, that would have been the start of Stephen Kenny's contract as the Republic of Ireland manager. He thinks at this point the FAI should speak to Mick McCarthy and let Stephen Kenny take charge of the qualifier just because of how it's been pushed back.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one. I mean, you have to have sympathy for both of them. I mean, Stephen Kenny has waited his time. He's ready to take on the Ireland position, but also Mick McCarthy never really got to finish off his reign. And I suppose one way of looking at it is that Mick McCarthy is getting, as we know, that payment at the end of his career, or at the end of the stint at Ireland, 1.3 million. So that'll soften the blow a little bit if he doesn't get to finish it out. But I also think that the way that things ended with Mick last time in his reign as Ireland manager, that he'll really want to end this stint as this was almost like a homecoming for him, a second chance at the cherry to finally, win over the Irish fans again, and he will want every opportunity to do that as far as I'm concerned. It's unfortunate for Stephen Kenny, but I think, like everyone else, he's just going to have to be understanding with this. He's going to have to understand that Mick McCarthy, yes, he was contracted until November or around that date, But he was also contracted for the Euros and to get Ireland to the Euros, and the Euros has been pushed back. So that's something that he's going to have to consider. I think it's probably fair to keep Mick McCarthy in for this reign.
Phil Egan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you have to keep Mick on because he was brought in to get Ireland to the Euros. Obviously, the Euros have been pushed back. Nobody knew when this agreement was put in place that the coronavirus was going to happen. So in that case, I think that the goalposts have moved drastically. And I think also from Stephen Kenny's point of view, I can understand he's due to take over on the 1st of August. Maybe he needs to sit down with the FAI and say, look, if Mick McCarthy stays on and he could be there till 2021, then, how does that impact Stephen Kenny's contract? Because that eats into the campaign he would have had. We don't know what's going to happen with the Nations League games. Are the FAI in a position to say to Stephen Kenny, look, we're moving the goalposts obviously to keep Mick in, and we'll move them for you as well. We'll give you more time because we'll backdate your start date. So maybe they say you get another campaign. That could be something that they'll have to do because, everyone is losing out in this situation. And I think the FAI, when this agreement was put in place, a lot of people were scratching heads, but then when we saw how good Stephen Kenny was doing with the under-21s, we thought actually maybe this isn't the worst idea. This could actually work out pretty well. But that's all changed now. I think everyone just needs to keep level heads, sit around the negotiating table. But we'd like to know soon, and I'm sure Stephen Kenny and Mick McCarthy would as well.
I get the feeling as well, Enda, that Stephen Kenny would probably be quite open to having those conversations. He doesn't strike me as the type of character who is going to demand that his contract starts on August the 1st.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I would say he will be quite understanding with the current climate that's going on. At the same token, though, I would probably imagine that he won't lose out as much as people might imagine. Like Phil is saying, he probably will have to go back to the negotiation table and sort out something to help him in the sense that he is losing out in a couple of months. So he probably will end up either getting a bigger payout package if he is let go as Ireland boss, if that happens, or he, like Phil is suggesting, he might actually get another campaign added on. So I don't think he'll lose out too much. He won't be a pushover in that sense, but I do think he will be understanding in the sense that the goalposts, like Phil has been saying, have moved drastically and things have changed, and you can't just expect the exact same thing to happen with the turmoil that went on in the world in the last couple of months.
Unfortunate as well, Phil, for the Republic of Ireland women's team. Vera Pauw's side have started qualifying in Group I really well, notwithstanding 2 games still to come against Germany. But their game where they were set to play Ukraine in early June in qualifying as well for what could well be Euro 2022 rather than 21 at this stage, that was a pretty important fixture for them that was coming up at the start of June as well.
Yeah, I think that's the crunch game because you mentioned the 2 games against Germany, home and away, and not even the most optimistic Irish fan thinks Ireland are going to get anything out of those 2 games. Germany are just the dominant team in the group. There's a reason they're top seeds. We are not top seeds, or second seeds even. And that game against Ukraine, obviously the win in Tala was huge. So when this game does eventually happen, whenever it is, if Ireland can get a draw, but then it pretty much sets them up to get the runners-up spot, whether that's good enough for an automatic qualification or for a playoff. But I think it makes sense to push the championships back, because if you have 2 European championships, both men's and women's, on the same summer, if we want to grow the women's game, you need to have it the centre of attention. Look how big the World Cup was last summer. So you need the same with the European Championships as well. And you move to the 2022. Obviously, it's in England as well, which would be a great chance if we were to qualify to get a good crowd to go over to it. But yeah, like we've been talking about in the last few minutes, everything is on hold for the moment, and we just have to wait and see. But yeah, that game is obviously, as far as I'm concerned, Ireland's most important game left in the group.
And we're in the realms of speculation at this stage in terms of what's going to happen. But in terms of the domestic leagues, I think The best case scenario that any of the heads of leagues have put forward this week is Germany, where they're hoping that perhaps by the end of May, where maybe Germany hasn't been as affected by the coronavirus so far as some of the other countries across Europe who run major European leagues, they're hoping to get back at the end of May, and they're still hoping to finish by June the 30th. Kind of the end of June keeps on coming up as a date purely because of this contract situation. Now, I know that FIFPro have mentioned a few times that potentially short-term extensions could be made, but this is whenever football does get back, and I know compared to the pandemic, this is small-time stuff, but I get the feeling, Enda, we're going to have a look at contracts when it does, because it seems, even at the most optimistic of leagues, June the 30th seems way too short a period to get finished.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, I know we're going to talk about what the Premier League are thinking of doing as well, and they have set a June date as well. And I suppose one way of looking at it is that China, if you look at them in a case study, that they have now about 90% of their population who have received or have contracted COVID-19 have recovered from it. So that's about a 3 to 4 month period that they went through, and now they're coming out the other end. So maybe they're looking at that as well as the contract issues that has arisen, as maybe we will be out of this within 3 to 4 months' time, which would be June or July. I think May is extremely optimistic at this point in time, because we don't even know how many people have it, because not everyone is being tested. I know most of this would be behind closed doors as well, so that adds another layer to it. Do you really want to finish out the season with no fans in the stadiums? I would argue against that. It would take away from the spectacle. But if you're really looking into this, it's money that is driving this and nothing else. If money wasn't an issue with this, then they wouldn't have set that date at all. They would have just pushed back, said we'll finish this season whenever we can. But this comes down solely to money. And if these seasons are rushed in, we could see a situation sort of like Cheltenham, where and the Anfield game, the Liverpool Atletico game, where people are looking back on it and thinking, yeah, in hindsight, that wasn't a good idea. And if they rush back into playing football when clearly it is not ready to come back and the world's not ready for it, then we won't look on that too kindly, I don't think.
Phil, what do you think of this idea that's been floated? There's been one really extreme idea which people will have read this week, and I know The Independent in the UK, I think, were the first to break it, was the consideration of potentially all of the teams basically coming together in the Midlands of the UK and playing it off in stadiums which are going to be empty and all the players being tested beforehand. What do you think of this very extreme potential thing that could happen?
Yeah, I think extreme is the word, and it would have a feel of a World Cup, because there'd be a certain amount of games on. Obviously, all the games behind closed doors, they'd all be shown on TV. And regardless of what you think of the idea, there would be an appetite for football fans to watch these games, because we're going to be sitting in our houses for the next few weeks, few months. We don't know exactly. It's an indefinite period at the moment. So people would watch these games. I guarantee you, if you went to the viewing figures, they would go through the roof. Then watching games with no fans at these neutral venues would almost have a feel of what you'd see on Eurosport for those underage World Cups, where there's nobody at the games. You can hear all the players shouting at each other, the instructions from referees, the instructions from coaches. So it seems a very bizarre situation, but unfortunately, as Enda said, this has all been driven by money, and they're desperate to get the season finished. Obviously, there's been a few people talking about just scrap the season, void it. There's only 9 games left in the Premier League season. We don't know what's going to happen for next season. So surely you try and finish the shorter season first before you go into the longer season, a full season, which you can actually change. You can change how that's set up. You can't change that there's 9 games left.
Yeah.
Can I give you my proposal? Because I've been kind of messing around with what could potentially happen or what could potentially work. So I think summer is it's a complete write-off. I think it's very, very optimistic to think that you might be back before summer. So what I'm proposing is you wait until October, November time. You finish this current season, the 10 games from October to December. Then from January until February, you finish the Champions League and the FA Cups and the domestic leagues. And then when the African Cup of Nations, I think, starts middle to late January. So you might have to start the Euros a little bit later than that. Or sorry, I messed up there. You give the players a break, then a summer break from March until the summertime. Then you play the Euros in the summer as normal, and then you start a season as you would in August as normal. So that way you're basically scrapping next season, but starting it a year later, and you're not missing out on much football. So that's what I would think would be a decent enough proposal in terms of you'd get all the major tournaments finished. You would be able to finish out the seasons per your contracts and the TV deals. And I think there would be an appetite for that come the end of the year.
Just to expand on your idea slightly, Enda, does that mean no transfer window this coming summer then?
Well, I don't think people are even going to be thinking about the transfers window situation. Clubs might be, but there's no summer transfer this year.
What do you reckon?
Well, I think clubs will be thinking about it, because some clubs are unfortunately going to be hit so badly financially that they're going to have to sell players. So there's going to be definitely an appetite out there for them to get rid of players, because it might be the difference with them staying afloat or not. So I know it's very hard to imagine, and even when this week I found it quite tough even to bother reading transfer speculation, because I'm thinking, when's it going to happen? I know players still have to think about their futures, and there could have been players before this break came in that were thinking that I'm going to move in the summer, and maybe they have to put it on hold. The only thing with that end, obviously, you're looking at TV deals. So if you're scrapping a full season, which is, as I said to you, I think it's easier to scrap a season that has never happened than it is to scrap a season that is 3/4 the way through. But what do you do with the TV deal? Do you sit around the table and say, look, we'll push it back a year. We'll all move as if this season. So most of those TV deals are 3 years.
Yeah, so I sort of instead of just pretend that the 2021 season never happened. So if Sky have the deal until 2023 or 2024, just push it back another year. Give them that every year. And you're not losing out on any money. They're not losing out on any money because they're getting it. I know they will be in a short term, but on a long term basis, I think overall it would work. And plus, you'd be able to have fans back in the stadium. Hopefully by November, December, you'd be able to have these stadiums packed again. So that's the benefit of having revenue from the fans as well. So it's obviously not perfect, but that's as good as an idea as I think the idea of having a Club World Cup sort of situation for the Premier League. What happens if one player tests positive? Is that the entire thing called off?
Yeah, I think it would have to be. I think it has to be a case of everybody who goes into the stadium on that given day, whenever it returns, whether fans are there, whether it's just backroom staff and players, everybody has to be clear of COVID-19, because we can't have the risk of potentially one person being there who could transmit it to somebody else, because then at that point basically football has been guilty of spreading the disease. I think we have to get to a point where, I think what was it the EFL and the Premier League said yesterday, will allow the Premier League to return once it's safe to do so. I think my definition, at least, Phil, of safe to do so would be a guarantee that everybody there is not carrying COVID-19.
Yeah, obviously that's easier to police if it's just teams and squads and management, because a lot of these Premier League clubs are going to have the technology, they're going to have the testing facilities. Whereas if you start introducing supporters, that's when the grey areas come in. I mean, I know Paddy Agnew was on last week talking about that game in Milan between Atalanta and Valencia, and how badly COVID-19 was spread that night. We don't know the extremes of it, but it certainly looks like it played a role. We can't have that. We don't know what role the game at Anfield between Liverpool and Atletico did, but that seemed crazy that game was going ahead as well.
Yeah, at the very least, Enda, when it came to those games, the game zero between Valencia and Atalanta, which has been blamed for a lot of the spread in Andalusia in Spain, where potentially fans brought it back. And similarly, there was, I think, 1,000 cases in Madrid at the time that those Atletico fans, 3,000 or so, travelled to Anfield. We can never probably concretely put a number on it, same with Cheltenham, but still the risk was definitely increased by those events taking place.
It definitely was, and I suppose would be quicker to blame the British government for their lack of action and their idea of herd immunity, because they were actively encouraging these sort of large gatherings at that time. So people went to these events based on that advice. When they got more information, they probably should have self-isolated. But there's stories. I remember a couple of weeks ago of reading that a Valencian journalist contracted COVID-19 when he went to that exact Atalanta game in Milan. So we obviously can't put a number on how many people got them at this point, but you can definitely guarantee that a lot of people have. It's just putting your finger on how many. But for this tournament, you would have no fans there. Obviously, it wouldn't be possible. I think the reason it got British government backing was because of that fact, and it was also down to the fact that they think this might actually keep people indoors for a few weeks if they have something to watch on TV. So that's probably one of the thinkings that goes behind it. But one thing you need to consider as well is the legality of these games. They can't go ahead without medical staff at them, and ambulances have to be there. Is a Premier League World Cup style event the correct use of those sort of resources in a country that has a rapidly growing number of people and a rapidly growing number of deaths? I don't think so.
Yeah, Phil, there's a potential balancing act in all this because, football is known as the opium of the people, and if you're asking people to still social distance into the summer, maybe even if some of the restrictions are lifted a bit, potentially having 2 or 3 games of football on an evening and into a night is a good way to keep quite a few of the population sitting in front of a TV.
Yeah, and that was the thinking behind the 3:00 games on a Saturday, which obviously have a blackout in the UK. We obviously have no problems here. We can watch those games, but that was the thinking behind that, where they'd be encouraging people to stay in and not go to the pub or go around to friends' houses to watch these games. So, yeah, like I said, it's all a game basically of wait and see. And, people say it's quite trivial talking about football during this pandemic, but we've seen the power of sport in the past before, where people say it's only a game, and that might well be the case, but people need a bit of joy in their lives as well, because unfortunately there is people dying out there. There's going to be so many people that have been affected by this. They need something to take their mind off things. They need to try and get back to normality. Now, football behind closed doors isn't normal, but it's closer than no football at all.
And a lot of people have been very heavily hit economically during this pandemic as well, in terms of wage cuts and in terms of layoffs. And Norwich, Newcastle, Spurs have all put quite a few of their non-playing staff, 550 in the case of Spurs, onto furlough leave, where effectively the government are topping up the payment that they're getting from Spurs to be at home. So they've taken an economic hit through all this. We're still at a position where the Professional Footballers Association are in conversation with the Premier League and the EFL. As it stands, clubs across England at the moment are yet to take a pay cut. Not to sound like a socialist, but it does feel quite harsh that your labourer who might have been working for Tottenham Hotspur up until this week is now on a massively reduced pay, while the footballers who are earning in excess of £100,000 a week are currently taking home their full wage while football is stopped.
Have you been reading Karl Marx on your time off, Will?
Look, lockdowns do strange things, Enda.
No, in all seriousness, though, it seems crazy to me that none of the players in the Premier League have come out and taken massive pay cuts. Granted, I do want to touch on something Pat Nevin said a few weeks ago on the football show, that behind closed doors, you don't actually know how much footballers are doing. They're actually doing quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to the wages, I just want to focus on Tottenham specifically, because I looked into some of their wages. I mean, Harry Kane's the highest paid player. He's earning $200,000 a week. Heung-min Son, he's on $140,000 a week. And Hugo Lloris, $100,000 a week. I know they're some of the highest bracket players, but that's what they're earning a week. Some people couldn't dream of earning that in 4 years. And I looked into some of the wages that stadium workers get paid across England. I couldn't find any specific wages for Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, but the average retail worker in a football stadium earns between £8 to £10 an hour, or a higher bracket stadium worker earns from £10 to £15 an hour. So in the Tottenham situation, they're taking a 20% pay cut. So if you're earning £8 to £10 an hour, 20% of that comes down to £6 to £8 per hour. So that's not a livable wage in a city like London. Granted, the wage might be a little bit higher in London. I'm not really sure if it is. That was just an average one that I found. But when you're looking at a player who earns, if you take one of his weekly wage, that could pay almost 3 or 4 workers for a full couple of months. Mm-hmm. So all it would take for them is to forego their wages for 2 or 3 months, and that could help a whole ton of people. In Tottenham's case, 550 non-playing staff. That could help them. And whatever about the footballers, I know they deserve to be paid quite a bit because they are the stars, and in the past they haven't been paid well at all. But they wouldn't be able to play football without those staff, without the people who put the pitch together, without the people who wash the kits. And they are essential workers, whether we see them all the time or not.
Phil, obviously, negotiations notwithstanding, at some point over the weekend or into next week, perhaps an agreement is found, and across the league a certain amount of payment might be handed back by footballers. But should it even be a case that the PFA have to negotiate on this? Shouldn't the players have made a move already?
Yeah, I think maybe some of the players would like to make a move, but I think the instructions that they've been given, I would imagine, is from the PFA, and the PFA are the ones that will do the negotiating for them. You know, they are the players' union, so the players will be under instruction. Leave it to us. We'll sort it out for you, whether it's wage cuts or wage deferrals. But you know, Enda mentioned it there in relation to Pat and Evan talking about what we don't really know what players are up to behind closed doors. Some players don't want to be seen they don't want their name in the paper to see, you know, Will O'Callaghan donated a certain amount of money to the local charity. Some players just don't want that. Other players, it still gets leaked out. So we don't know. But I think the PFA are the ones calling the shots here. So I'd imagine something will develop on this in the next few days. But you think of the amount of money that they earn, and you think of the struggles that people are going to go through. It's bad enough having to sit in your house isolated for the next few weeks for God knows how long. But if you've got financial worries, it's just going to add to the stress of it all. And some of those footballers wouldn't really know what it's like to feel like that.
Yeah, that's one of the things as well, and even quite aside from the footballers, I think what's hurt a lot of Spurs fans, particularly over the last 72 hours or so, you know, Joe Lewis, their owner, is a multi-millionaire. I think he's touching on a billionaire. You take 7 million, I think, is the salary that Daniel Levy has taken, and he took a 4 million bonus once the stadium was completed as well. Obviously, in the case of Levy, he's taken a bit of a cut here as well, but the owners are not personally shouldering it. And it's the same with Mike Ashley at Newcastle at the moment too. I think this has been true of a lot of companies around the world at the moment, that, you know, one of the things about capitalism is you'll make money for a long period of time. You'll hit hard times as well. But it seems it's the worker who has been hit the hardest here, as opposed to those at the very top. Yeah,
and I suppose there's no real surprise in that, though. If we look at just the Premier League as an organisation, or the mammoth thing that it is now, it was built. The reason they changed from the English Football League to the Premier League was so that the richer clubs could get even richer and the smaller clubs could be pushed down. And what's happening within these club structures is no different. The club owners don't want to take the hit that these clubs are going to take a hit financially. There's no doubt about that. But when you're looking at bigger clubs like Tottenham and basically any Premier League club, they're going to take a hit, but it's not going to be massive. It's going to be pushed down the line a little bit. They're going to recover from it. Whereas the likes of the teams in the lower divisions, who genuinely will struggle to survive as a club, when they're laying off staff, you can understand where they're coming from, because they're just trying to save the club. Whereas these Premier League clubs like Tottenham, Daniel Levy, hit what he's earning. It's not justifiable when you see that some of these lower paid staff are getting laid off and he's taking home that salary. He's protecting his own skin, and it's not surprising, but it's not exactly easy to take either for those workers.
Phil, just before we finish up, Paul Barber, the Brighton chief executive, was speaking this week as well, and he kind of spoke a little bit about the transfer market. He reckons that the transfer market this summer is going to be entirely deflated. He said it's going to be a buyer's market this summer as well, because realistically these Premier League clubs and clubs across Europe aren't particularly cash rich, and that they rely on things like your season ticket renewals coming in at the moment, your TV deals which were set to maybe be paid in July for the coming season. In all likelihood, with that all up in the air, we're probably unlikely to see any kind of mega transfers taking place this summer.
No, and if you're a player that wants to move, I wonder, has your mindset changed a bit? Because given the circumstances that the world is in at the moment, how would you feel about walking away from the club that you're attached to during these difficult times and going off and signing for a new club? I mean, I'm sure there's people out there who wouldn't give it a second thought, but I wonder, will it change things? But there will be players that will be sold because clubs will need it. And, I know there's rich clubs in the Premier League, but like so many of us, that if a few paychecks don't come in, you start getting dangerously close to the breadline, and then things don't look as rosy. So that's why we will see a few players being sold, and it just means that we really don't know what kind of product we're going to get when the football resumes, whether it's the end of this current campaign that resumes, or we go straight into a new one. But it's just, everything is so unpredictable at the moment. But I think another thing that those lower league clubs could do with a real dig out from the rich clubs. How would you feel if you were one of these super rich clubs reading the paper every day, another lower league club has just gone out of business? Because that's where we're going.
On a very final note, Enda, and this will be useless to audio listeners at the moment on the podcast section of offtheball.com and those who are listening on OTB Sports Radio Live at the moment, but for those who are in the video realm and can see our three-way Skype, both Phil and I have extremely boring backgrounds. I've got the background of my spare bedroom. Phil's got a nice painting in the background, but generally he's in a room at the moment. Enda Coll, you've made the effort to put a few props in place. Tell us about the jersey behind you and the jersey you're wearing.
Well, the jersey behind me is it's a replica of the '99 Champions League jersey of United. I actually hung it up right before. I don't have that hanging up all the time in my bedroom. I just hung it up before we came onto this Skype call. What I actually have done is I have a desk behind me, which would be naturally pointing towards my bed, but I didn't want my bed in picture.
Okay.
So I have one of these plastic boxes on my bed with a couple of books stacked on top of it, and then my phone is propped up. So it's not exactly the most professional setup, but it works. And to finish off, the jersey I'm wearing is an Irish Heart Foundation jersey that we got when we were playing the five-a-side charity match a couple of years ago, or was it last year?
Last year, yeah.
It
was a desperate game.
Who knows what day and time it is, but I set up one of the goals in that game for Kevin Kilban, and that was probably the highlight of my footballing career to date.
Excellent. That concludes our edition of OTB Cribs, where we get to see Enda's room. Gentlemen, fantastic to talk to you as always.
Cheers.
Thanks very much.
I was Enda Coll and Phil Egan. I've been Will O'Callaghan. This has been the Paddy Power Half Hour. Tune in to us next Friday at noon. We'll talk to you then.
The Paddy Power Half Hour on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power, the greatest football partnership since Jeff and Heskey.